The courtroom is silent, not the calm kind, but the kind that feels like a held breath before something breaks. Kody Brown sits stiff in his chair, eyes fixed forward, jaw tight, while behind him, the past he tried to bury is about to be spoken out loud, under oath. No cameras, no edits, no protection, just truth, and a family about to be torn apart in front of everyone. If you've ever wondered what really happened behind closed doors in the Brown family, this is where it all begins. The courtroom smells faintly of old wood and recycled air, the kind of place where time feels stuck between regret and consequence. Light from the high windows falls in uneven lines across the polished floor, landing directly on Kody Brown's face. He doesn't look like the confident patriarch the world once knew. He looks smaller, tired, almost cornered. Across the aisle, Christine sits upright, hands folded so tightly her knuckles have gone pale. She isn't angry anymore, not in the explosive way people expect. Her anger has cooled into something sharper, quieter, and far more dangerous. Determination. Every breath she takes feels measured, like she's been rehearsing this moment for years without even knowing it. Janelle sits 2 rows behind her, posture calm, but eyes alert, absorbing every detail. She's always been the observer, the one who watches the chessboard instead of the individual pieces. And today, she already knows this isn't just about one marriage collapsing. This is about truth finally demanding its turn to speak. Robyn arrives last. The room shifts the moment she enters. Not loudly, no gasps, no whispers. Just a subtle tightening in the air, like everyone instinctively senses the temperature dropping. She chooses a seat close to Kody, close enough to touch him if she wants to, but she doesn't. Her hands remain folded in her lap, trembling slightly, betraying the calm expression she's trying so hard to maintain. The judge clears his throat, papers shuffling like a warning. This court is now in session. And just like that, years of unspoken resentment, broken promises, and carefully constructed lies are no longer private. The first testimony doesn't come from Kody. It comes from Christine. She stands slowly, smoothing the fabric of her jacket, taking a breath so deep it looks like it might break her. When she speaks, her voice doesn't shake, not even once. "I stayed longer than I should have," she says, eyes fixed forward, "because I believed in the family more than I believed in myself." Kody shifts. The movement is small, but everyone sees it. Christine continues, words steady, almost gentle. "I was told love meant sacrifice. That loyalty meant silence. That if I just tried harder, I'd finally be enough." There's a pause, the kind that feels heavy, intentional. "And I did try, for years." The courtroom feels smaller now, like the walls are leaning in to listen. Kody swallows, his jaw tightening. This isn't how he remembers it. Or maybe it is. And that's exactly the problem. Christine's gaze finally moves toward him. Not with anger, with clarity. "You didn't just stop loving me," she says quietly. "You stopped seeing me." That's when something shifts, not in Christine, in Kody. For the first time since the hearing began, his expression cracks. Just for a second. A flicker of something close to panic flashes across his face before he masks it again. Because he knows what's coming next. And so does everyone else. Right then, the courtroom doors open again, and the person who walks in changes everything. This is the moment where the story stops being about a broken marriage and starts becoming something much darker. The door closes behind her with a soft click, but the sound echoes louder than anything else in the room, and suddenly, every eye shifts toward the woman, no one expected to see so soon. Her presence slicing through the tension like a blade. And for a moment, even Kody forgets how to breathe, because this is not how he imagined this day unfolding. Not like this, not with her walking in so calmly, as if she owns the truth everyone else is dancing around. And as she takes her seat, the air thickens, heavy with unfinished arguments and years of unspoken resentment, while Christine doesn't turn her head, but her shoulders stiffen just enough to reveal recognition, and Janelle's eyes narrow in that quiet, analytical way she's perfected over decades of watching this family fracture in slow motion. The judge clears his throat again, reminding everyone that this is a court of law, not a family therapy session. But even he seems to sense that what's unfolding here is bigger than legal paperwork, because this is the moment where history begins to contradict itself, where memories start clashing like opposing testimonies in the same mind. And when the first question is asked, it lands like a spark near gasoline. Mrs. Brown, can you explain your role in the breakdown of the family structure? The silence that follows is suffocating, stretching long enough for every camera in the room to feel invasive. And when Robyn finally speaks, her voice trembles not with fear, but with something closer to calculation, carefully measured, practiced, almost rehearsed. As she says she never wanted this, that she only wanted unity, peace, love, and stability for the children. But the words sound hollow, even to herself. And somewhere deep in the room, Christine lets out a quiet breath that carries years of disbelief. Strong, this is the moment where the story stops being about who left and starts becoming about who was believed. And as Robyn continues, her voice rising and falling in controlled emotion, something unexpected happens. Kody interrupts her, his voice sharper than anyone anticipated, frustration spilling out as he accuses the room of rewriting history, of turning him into a villain for choices he claims were made out of loyalty. But the way his hands shake betrays him, and for the first time, the image of control he's always projected begins to fracture. Janelle leans forward then, her tone calm but piercing, reminding everyone that loyalty was never supposed to mean silence, and that love shouldn't require erasing yourself to survive it. And suddenly, the courtroom feels smaller, like the walls are closing in on decades of suppressed truth. And even the judge looks unsettled as testimonies begin overlapping, voices clashing in emotion rather than volume, the past unraveling in layers no one can neatly put back together. And just when you think the tension can't possibly rise any higher, a single document is placed on the table, a document no one expected to see here today. And its presence alone sends a visible ripple through the room, because it represents something that was never meant to be exposed, something that could rewrite the entire narrative of loyalty, sacrifice, and control. And as eyes dart between the paper and the people involved, the energy shifts from emotional to explosive, from reflection to confrontation, because now it's no longer about who felt hurt, but who knew the truth and chose to stay silent. And as the judge calls for order once more, it becomes painfully clear that this courtroom is no longer just dissecting a family. It's dismantling the very story the world was told for years, piece by painful piece. And just when everyone thinks the worst has already surfaced, a quiet voice from the back of the room asks a single question that freezes the entire court in place. A question that doesn't accuse or defend, but simply asks why. And in that moment, every mask slips, every certainty cracks, and the real battle finally begins, setting the stage for revelations that will change everything the audience thought they knew about love, loyalty, and the price of staying too long in a story that was already broken. Period. End. Period. End. Period. End. Period. The room feels smaller now, like the walls themselves are leaning in to hear what comes next. And as the judge calls for order once again, there's a shift in the air that no one can ignore, because this isn't just testimony anymore. It's reckoning, and it begins the moment the judge turns toward Janelle and asks her to speak. Her voice steady, but carrying a weight that suggests she's been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone realizes. And as she rises from her seat, there's a stillness that settles over the room, a quiet so complete you can almost hear the collective heartbeat of everyone watching. Because when Janelle speaks, she doesn't waste words. She never has. She simply says that what happened in that family didn't happen overnight, that it was built slowly, decision by decision, compromise by compromise, until the foundation itself cracked under the pressure of favoritism and silence. And her eyes flick briefly toward Kody, not with anger, but with something far more unsettling. Disappointment, the kind that can't be argued with or explained away. She talks about the early days, when everything felt possible, when they believed the family was stronger together, when sacrifice felt noble instead of suffocating. And as she speaks, the courtroom seems to drift backward in time, into memories of shared dinners, shared homes, shared dreams that slowly began to fracture the moment equality stopped being practiced and became a slogan instead. And while she speaks calmly, every word lands like a measured strike. Because this isn't a woman lashing out. This is someone finally naming the truth she's carried quietly for years. Kody shifts in his seat, again, jaw tightening. And for a split second, he looks like he might interrupt. But something in Janelle's tone stops him. A quiet authority that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. And when she says that the family stopped being about unity and started revolving around appeasement, the courtroom reacts, not loudly, but collectively. A subtle shift, a shared understanding that something irreversible is being exposed. From this is the moment where the audience realizes the story was never about one broken marriage, but about a system that slowly devoured everyone inside it. And the silence that follows feels heavy enough to crush the air itself. Then, without warning, the focus turns to Robyn again, and this time the shift is sharper, more volatile, because the questions are no longer abstract. They're direct, pointed, unavoidable. And as she's asked to respond to Janelle's statements, her composure begins to crack in small, telling ways. A tremor in her voice, a pause that stretches too long. Eyes darting toward Kody as if searching for reassurance that doesn't come. She insists she never asked for favoritism, never intended to disrupt the balance, but the words ring hollow against the backdrop of years of footage, memories, and now sworn statements. And the courtroom seems to collectively hold its breath when she admits, almost accidentally, that she needed more support during certain periods, a phrase that lands with the weight of confession, because everyone understands what it implies. Kody finally speaks again, louder now, frustration breaking through the carefully maintained control, arguing that he was simply responding to needs, that leadership requires hard choices, that someone always gets hurt. But his voice wavers, and for the first time, the authority he's relied on sounds defensive rather than decisive. Christine watches this exchange in silence, her face unreadable, until the judge turns to her once more and asks a single, devastating question. When did you know it was over? A single break from meaning backward. And for a moment, she doesn't answer, her eyes lowering as if she's replaying 1,000 private moments in her mind. And when she finally speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper, but it cuts deeper than anything shouted so far. As she describes the exact moment she realized she had disappeared inside her own life, the day she recognized that her needs no longer registered, that her pain had become background noise, and that staying meant teaching her children that love requires erasing yourself. The room goes still, frozen in the weight of that confession, and even the judge seems momentarily stunned, because this isn't legal testimony anymore. It's emotional truth laid bare, and the impact is undeniable. This is the point where the story stops being about blame and starts becoming about survival. And you can feel the energy shift again, as everyone senses that the most dangerous truths are still waiting to surface. Then, just when it feels like the emotional peak has been reached, a document is introduced quietly into evidence, its contents not yet revealed, but its presence alone changes everything, because it represents something concrete, something that can't be explained away with feelings or intentions. And as the judge reviews it silently, a shadow crosses his expression, subtle but unmistakable, and when he looks up, his gaze locks onto Kody with a seriousness that sends a visible ripple through the room. The air tightens, hearts race, and every person present knows that whatever is written on that page has the power to rewrite the narrative completely, to confirm suspicions that until now have lived only in whispers and sideways glances. And just as the tension reaches its breaking point, just as everyone leans forward, waiting for the next word, the judge calls for a brief recess, his gavel striking with a finality that echoes like a warning shot, leaving the room suspended in uncertainty, unanswered questions hanging heavy in the air, and the unmistakable sense that when the court reconvenes, nothing, not the family, not the story, not the truth, will ever be the same again. The courtroom feels different when everyone returns, like the air itself has been disturbed and hasn't quite settled back into place. And as people file in, there's a strange, quiet urgency in their movements, as if they all understand that whatever happens next will change the shape of everything that came before. And when the judge takes his seat again, his expression is no longer neutral, but heavy with deliberation. The kind that comes from realizing this case is no longer just about contracts or custody or broken promises, but about the emotional wreckage left behind by years of unspoken power struggles. The document introduced earlier now sits on the bench like a silent witness, its presence commanding more attention than any person in the room. And when the judge finally addresses it, his voice carries a weight that makes every breath feel amplified, explaining that what's contained inside isn't just financial or logistical, but deeply personal, outlining patterns, timelines, and decisions that reveal how influence was wielded behind closed doors. And as he speaks, the color drains from Kody's face in slow motion, his jaw tightening as if he's bracing for impact, while Robyn stares straight ahead, unblinking, as though refusing to acknowledge what's being uncovered. The courtroom listens as the judge reads fragments aloud, not every detail, but enough to paint a picture of quiet control and emotional prioritization that contradicts years of public narrative. And with every sentence, the room grows heavier, the air thick with the realization that this isn't about misunderstandings anymore. It's about patterns. Break-in, 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 breakin', 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 breakin'. Christine sits frozen, eyes fixed on the floor, her breathing shallow, as if hearing confirmation of things she always felt but never had proof of is somehow more painful than the uncertainty ever was. While Janelle's expression hardens, her posture straightening in a way that suggests vindication mixed with grief. Because being right doesn't feel like winning when the cost is this high. When the judge pauses and looks directly at Kody, asking him to respond, the moment stretches unbearably long, and when he finally speaks, his voice is quieter than anyone expects, stripped of the confidence that once defined him. And for the first time, he doesn't argue or deflect. He explains, haltingly, that he believed he was doing what was necessary to keep things together. That he thought prioritizing one relationship at a time was the only way to manage chaos, and that somewhere along the way, he lost sight of the others without meaning to. But even as the words leave his mouth, they sound fragile, insufficient, like excuses that crumble under the weight of consequence. The judge listens carefully, then asks a question so simple it feels devastating. Did you ever consider how your choices would feel to the people you were asking to wait, to sacrifice, to accept less? And the silence that follows is deafening, because there is no good answer, only the truth hanging in the air, heavy and undeniable. Robyn shifts beside him, her hands twisting together, and when she finally speaks, her voice cracks with emotion as she insists she never wanted to be the center of conflict, that she only wanted stability for her children, that she never asked for anyone else to be pushed aside. But her words falter when the judge gently asks whether she ever questioned why that stability always came at someone else's expense. And for the first time, she has no response. The room seems to exhale collectively, as if everyone has been holding their breath for years waiting for that silence to exist. And in it, something irreversible settles. The understanding that intentions don't erase impact, and love doesn't excuse harm. Christine finally looks up then, her eyes glossy but resolute, and when she speaks, her voice carries a calm that feels earned through pain, saying she doesn't want punishment or revenge, only acknowledgement, only the truth to be spoken plainly, so that the story stops being rewritten to protect comfort, and her words land with quiet power, drawing nods even from those who once doubted her. The judge listens, nodding slowly, and for a moment, the courtroom feels less like a battlefield and more like a reckoning, a place where honesty is finally being allowed to breathe. But just as the emotional tide seems to settle, a clerk quietly approaches the bench with a final file, one that hadn't been part of the original proceedings. And the judge's expression shifts again, not with shock this time, but with concern. As he reviews its contents, his brow furrowing deeper with every page. And when he looks up, the tension spikes instantly, because whatever he's reading clearly changes the stakes. He clears his throat, eyes scanning the room, and announces that this new information raises serious questions about accountability that cannot be ignored, and that before any conclusions can be reached, further examination will be required, the kind that could alter everything discussed so far. A murmur ripples through the courtroom, disbelief and anxiety mixing in equal measure, as the realization sets in that the story is far from over, that what everyone thought was the climax is merely another turning point. Pibre, 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 pibre. Kody's face pales. Robyn's breath catches. Christine closes her eyes as if bracing herself, and Janelle exhales slowly, already preparing for what comes next. The judge brings down his gavel once more, announcing a continuation that hangs ominously in the air. And as the sound echoes through the chamber, it feels less like an ending and more like a warning. That the truth, once uncovered, doesn't stop unfolding, and that the next chapter will demand answers no one is ready to give. The courtroom reconvenes after the recess, and the tension that had been simmering before now feels like a living presence, pressing down on every person inside. And as the judge calls the room to order, there's a charged silence that makes each word spoken feel heavier, more consequential, because what's coming next isn't just testimony or argument, it's exposure, the slow peeling back of layers no one expected to be revealed publicly. And as Kody shifts uneasily in his seat, adjusting papers he doesn't need, the weight of the new evidence introduced before the break hangs over him like a storm cloud, and he can feel it, the room watching, analyzing, judging. Not only his words, but every flicker of expression, every twitch of a hand, the micro-reactions that betray control even when he thinks he's masking them perfectly. Christine leans forward slightly, hands gripping the bench, eyes locked on him with a quiet intensity, the kind that comes from years of understanding someone better than they understand themselves. And she waits, patient but prepared, knowing that when the truth comes out, it will confirm what she's always known deep down, that loyalty and love can be manipulated, twisted into a weapon, and that being the most reasonable person in the room does not guarantee protection from betrayal. Janelle sits back, calm and observing, her posture deceptively relaxed, but every detail noticed, every glance catalogued, as she mentally tracks the shifts in body language and tone, analyzing the unspoken communication that fills the space between words. And in this moment, she is the quiet force, the silent jury, understanding the nuances that the others are either blind to or unwilling to acknowledge. While Robyn's hands fold and unfold in her lap, her breathing shallow, as she anticipates the questions she'll be asked, questions that will require careful navigation between honesty, self-preservation, and emotional exposure, because she knows that any misstep could tip the balance, either casting her as the villain or unraveling the fragile perception of stability she has carefully constructed over the years. The judge's voice cuts through the tension, deliberate and steady, asking Kody to account for the decisions that led to the current state of affairs. Decisions that weren't made in a vacuum, but in a network of relationships, expectations, and unspoken hierarchies. And as Kody begins to speak, his voice is measured, defensive, revealing both a desire to explain and a subtle desperation to justify. Yet even as he details his intentions, The effect is muted because the courtroom has shifted. The lens through which his words are received is no longer one of deference but scrutiny, and every claim of reasoned choice is met with skepticism. Every assertion of fairness counterbalanced by the emotional testimony that has already unfolded. The accumulated weight of Christine's heartbreak, Janelle's insight, and Robyn's guarded vulnerability. Bracket, 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 bracket. This is the point where the audience understands that authority without empathy can crumble under its own weight. And as the dialogue intensifies, the dynamic between Kody and the women becomes more intricate. Each interaction layered with unspoken history, past conflicts, and hidden resentments. And the room feels like a pressure cooker, ready to erupt, because the conversation is no longer hypothetical or theoretical. It's about lived experience, personal sacrifice, and the consequences of choices made in the name of love, control, and family. Christine is next, called to respond, and when she rises, her voice is calm yet sharp, precise yet deeply emotional, as she recounts moments of invisibility, of being sidelined, of having her contributions minimized, her perspective ignored. And with each sentence, the courtroom shifts subtly, leaning in, absorbing, recognizing the pattern of neglect that had been carefully obscured by charm, charisma, and the appearance of order. And as she speaks, her eyes occasionally meet Kody's, not with anger, but with a clarity that unsettles him, because this is not accusation. This is articulation of lived truth, undeniable in its specificity and emotional weight. Robyn interjects, her tone measured, a mix of defensiveness and sincerity, acknowledging certain failures while attempting to frame her own actions within the context of intention and responsibility. But the tension escalates as the judge asks pointed questions, probing inconsistencies, testing memory, and forcing acknowledgement of the emotional consequences of each decision. And it becomes apparent that the courtroom is no longer just a place for legal scrutiny, but a stage for psychological revelation, a theater of accountability where each participant must navigate both fact and feeling, and where silence, hesitation, and micro-expression carry as much weight as spoken testimony. Janelle is summoned again, and her approach is deliberate, her words cutting through layers of pretense, highlighting patterns of favoritism, miscommunication, and emotional prioritization. And as she articulates these observations, the room collectively leans forward, sensing the cumulative effect of years of emotional imbalance being laid bare in a structured, undeniable format. And Kody's composure begins to falter subtly, the cracks in his practiced authority showing as he processes not only the direct implications of the statements, but the broader narrative that is now forming around him. Strongly, this is the moment where the tension peaks because the truth isn't just revealed. It's contextualized, framed, and made unavoidable. And as each piece of evidence, each recollection, each nuanced observation is introduced, the emotional stakes climb higher, driving both the participants and the audience toward a point of confrontation that feels imminent, inevitable, and potentially transformative. And then the focus shifts subtly toward an overlooked element, a minor testimony that at first seems trivial, but is loaded with implications that ripple across the room, touching every relationship, alliance, and unresolved grievance. And as it is brought forward, the emotional intensity rises again, because it reframes previous statements, adds layers of contradiction, and exposes subtleties that no one had accounted for, making the narrative both more complex and more compelling. P P P P P P P P P P P P P. The judge listens, notes taken, occasionally interjecting with clarifying questions that draw out the emotional subtext behind the legal content. And with every exchange, the courtroom becomes a microcosm of the family's internal dynamics, a distilled version of long-term conflicts, loyalties, and suppressed feelings, laid bare for public observation. And as Kody responds to these new elements, his defensiveness returns, tempered by a growing awareness that control has shifted, that the women's combined testimony has created a momentum that is increasingly difficult to counter, and that the truth, once articulated with specificity and emotional resonance, resists suppression. Christine's responses are deliberate, carefully calibrated to balance honesty, emotional exposure, and a refusal to descend into vengeance, while Robyn's body language fluctuates between composure and tension, signaling internal conflict and the difficulty of reconciling personal perspective with collective scrutiny. And Janelle maintains the role of observer and clarifier, synthesizing testimony, highlighting inconsistencies, and framing the narrative in a way that makes the consequences of each action, choice, and inaction starkly visible. As the session progresses, patterns emerge clearly: emotional neglect, misapplied authority, conflicting expectations, and the uneven distribution of attention and validation. And with each revelation, the atmosphere intensifies, charged with a mix of frustration, relief, anticipation, and apprehension, because the audience, like the courtroom, senses that the cumulative effect of these sessions is building toward an emotional climax that is not yet fully visible, but undeniably approaching. Strongly, this is the juncture where engagement peaks because the audience is immersed in both narrative complexity and emotional immediacy, understanding that the revelations are not isolated, but interconnected, that each statement adds depth, context, and consequence to the unfolding drama. And as the final segment of the session approaches, the tension escalates further, driven by the anticipation of confrontation, the unpredictability of responses, and the weight of accumulated truth. And just as the session seems to reach a momentary plateau, the judge introduces one final piece of evidence, an unexpected testimony from a secondary participant whose account challenges prior statements and introduces a twist that reframes previously understood motives, alliances, and responsibilities. And the courtroom collectively reacts, some leaning forward in disbelief, others exchanging quick, subtle glances, as the realization dawns that nothing in this narrative is settled, that certainty is illusory, and that the story, like the family itself, is layered, dynamic, and deeply entangled, leaving both participants and observers suspended in the uncertainty of what comes next, bracing for the continuation that will inevitably unravel more, reveal more, and demand reckoning in ways no one can yet predict. PP. P. Bracket. The courtroom settles into a tense hush as the session begins, an almost tangible weight pressing down on everyone present, and the energy feels different this time. Heavier, more urgent, as if every heartbeat, every shuffle of paper, every intake of breath carries the accumulated tension of the past sessions, and the judge's voice cuts through it, calm but insistent, reminding everyone that this proceeding is not merely about recollection, but accountability, and that every word spoken here will be considered in context, weighed against prior testimony, and ultimately contribute to a narrative that is far larger than any single perspective. While Kody sits rigid, fingers interlaced, jaw tight, eyes flicking between the women with an intensity that betrays both defensiveness and mounting anxiety, because the revelations of the previous sessions have clearly unsettled the carefully maintained image of control he has relied upon for years. And as he prepares to speak, there's a pause in the room that feels almost ceremonial. A collective inhalation, as if everyone is bracing for a breach in the emotional dam. The moment when restrained feelings will spill into words. And Christine, sitting forward, hands clenched lightly in her lap, watches with the quiet precision of someone who knows what is coming. Aware that her own testimony, combined with the subtle framing of events over time, has already created a ripple effect that is now threatening to become a tidal wave. While Janelle observes the room with a calm exterior, cataloging micro-expressions, noting shifts in tone and posture, reading the room with the analytical precision that has always allowed her to anticipate conflicts before they surface. And Robyn, seated close to Kody, takes in the atmosphere with measured breaths, her hands twisting subtly in her lap as she prepares herself to navigate the next set of questions, knowing that any misstep could tilt the balance of perception against her. And when the judge finally addresses the first piece of testimony, calling Kody to account for decisions made in private that had public consequences, the room leans in collectively, because this is where intention meets outcome, where control meets consequence, and where the veneer of leadership can crumble under scrutiny. And Kody's voice, when he speaks, carries a mixture of defensiveness and desperation, explaining that he acted in what he believed to be the family's best interests, that he sought to maintain order, balance, and stability. Yet even as he articulates these intentions, the subtle tremor in his tone betrays his awareness that justification cannot erase the emotional damage already done. And the judge, listening intently, probes deeper, asking questions designed to reveal not just actions, but motivations, the nuanced interplay between desire, fear, loyalty, and self-preservation. And as each question lands, the courtroom shifts subtly, the energy oscillating between tension, anticipation, and the raw vulnerability of truth. And Christine rises next, her movements deliberate and composed. But her voice carries an emotional undertone that immediately captures attention as she recounts moments of invisibility, neglect, and the feeling of being constantly overlooked, of sacrificing herself for a system that did not see her, did not validate her, did not honor her contributions. And as she speaks, the courtroom collectively absorbs the weight of these revelations, understanding that what is being articulated is not mere opinion or personal grievance, but a lived reality with clear consequences. And Robyn responds, her tone measured but tinged with defensiveness, acknowledging her own role while simultaneously emphasizing her intentions and the pressures she felt. Yet every word is scrutinized, every pause analyzed, as the subtle dynamics of power, perception, and emotional accountability play out before the court. And Janelle is called again, her voice calm, precise, but cutting through the layers of obfuscation and justification, articulating the patterns of favoritism, emotional imbalance, and the long-term consequences of decisions made under the guise of leadership. And as she speaks, the room seems to hold its collective breath. The gravity of years of subtle manipulation and unequal attention made undeniable. While Kody's composure shows cracks, micro-expressions of tension, uncertainty, and realization flickering across his face, betraying the growing recognition that the narrative is no longer fully under his control. And as the judge introduces another piece of evidence, private communications, documented patterns, corroborating witness statements, the atmosphere thickens, the energy in the room shifting from tense observation to acute anticipation, because these documents provide concrete, undeniable context, reframing prior statements, challenging previous assumptions, and illuminating inconsistencies in testimony. And the women respond accordingly, their body language, tone, and choice of words reflecting the delicate balance between asserting truth, maintaining dignity, and navigating emotional exposure. And the judge methodically examines each point, cross-referencing prior statements, pressing for clarity, and demanding accountability in a way that forces all participants to confront both the immediate and long-term implications of their actions. And Kody, when challenged on discrepancies between stated intentions and observed outcomes, attempts to clarify, but the defense of reasoning falters under the weight of cumulative evidence and emotionally resonant testimony, revealing both vulnerability and the limits of justification, while Christine, Robyn, and Janelle strategically reinforce their points, highlighting patterns rather than isolated incidents, emotional impact rather than theoretical constructs, and the audience, like the courtroom, perceives the shift. The transition from defensive explanation to the exposure of truth, the confrontation with consequences, and the undeniable emergence of accountability. And as each revelation unfolds, the tension escalates, emotional intensity builds, and the dynamic between Kody and the women becomes a delicate interplay of defensiveness, assertion, acknowledgement, and silent judgment, creating a narrative that is as compelling as it is intricate, as emotionally charged as it is structurally precise. And as the session progresses, the pace quickens, testimony overlaps with evidence presentation. Moments of quiet reflection are punctuated by bursts of emotional declaration, and the interplay between spoken words, body language, and implied meaning keeps all participants and observers on edge, drawing them into the story with a mixture of empathy, curiosity, and suspense. This is the moment where emotional engagement peaks, because the audience is not just observing events, but feeling their weight alongside the participants. Strong, P, and break, P, and break, 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 and break. And when the session reaches its midpoint, the judge introduces a critical piece of information, an external testimony that neither Kody nor the women anticipated, providing perspective that reframes previous statements, challenges prior assumptions, and injects new urgency into the proceedings. And as everyone absorbs this, subtle reactions ripple across the room: raised eyebrows, shifts in posture, a faint tightening of hands, a pause in breathing, all signaling the profound impact of the revelation. And as the judge directs focus toward Kody for response, the tension is almost unbearable. His previous defenses inadequate against the depth of the evidence and the emotional resonance of the testimony, compelling him to navigate a delicate path between admission, explanation, and self-preservation, while the women maintain a strategic composure, their insights and observations now fortified by corroboration and cumulative impact, reinforcing both credibility and authority in the unfolding narrative. And as the session continues, the courtroom transforms into a stage for psychological exploration, relational dynamics, and the unraveling of long-held assumptions, where every statement, pause, and gesture contributes to the emergent story. The audience perceives not only what is said, but what is left unsaid. And the stakes escalate with each exchange, creating a compelling interplay of tension, revelation, and emotional resonance that propels the narrative toward an inevitable climax. And as the final moments of the session approach, the judge pauses, reviews notes, and announces that the proceedings will continue with focused examination of these newly introduced elements, leaving the room suspended in anticipation, charged with unresolved questions, the weight of cumulative testimony, and the unspoken understanding that the unfolding drama is far from over. This is where engagement is cemented, because both participants and audience are left on the precipice. Edge, craving resolution, yet drawn irresistibly into the complexity of the truth as it continues to emerge. And the session concludes with a final gavel strike that echoes like a drumbeat, signaling not an end, but a turning point, the threshold of confrontation, and the deepening of a story that will continue to challenge perceptions, emotions, and loyalties as the courtroom saga unfolds. The courtroom opens once more, the atmosphere dense with anticipation, as if the walls themselves have absorbed the tension of the prior sessions and now exude it back into the room. And as the judge takes his seat, the women and Kody arrange themselves with quiet precision, aware that the next phase will demand both emotional stamina and strategic articulation, because what is about to unfold is not simply the continuation of testimony, but a confrontation with years of unresolved conflict, hidden resentments, and the accumulation of choices whose consequences have finally become unavoidable. And Kody sits upright, hands folded but fingers twitching imperceptibly, betraying the inner turmoil he strives to conceal behind a mask of composure, while Christine leans forward slightly, eyes fixed on him with a mixture of determination and restrained grief, knowing that every word she utters will carry the weight of both lived experience and moral authority. And Janelle, ever the observer, surveys the room with meticulous attention, noting micro-expressions, tone shifts, and subtle changes in posture that reveal more than the spoken words ever could, while Robyn's hands fold and unfold in her lap, her breathing controlled but uneven, reflecting the tension of having to navigate the precarious balance between emotional truth and personal protection. And the judge calls the session to order, his voice steady, but carrying a subtle gravity that underscores the importance of what is to follow. And the first witness is brought forward, someone who had remained largely in the background until now, whose perspective promises to illuminate hidden aspects of family dynamics. Space under parent that is speaking and primary child, the power structures and the consequences of decisions made behind closed doors, and as the witness speaks, recounting moments of manipulation, favoritism, and overlooked emotional needs, the room reacts with a quiet intensity, subtle nods, and fleeting expressions of recognition, because the testimony confirms patterns long suspected yet never formally articulated, and the impact is immediate, altering the energy in the room, shifting the perceived balance of authority and forcing Kody to confront not only his own recollection, but the interpretation of his actions as lived and remembered by others. And when questioned about specific incidents, he struggles to maintain coherence, defensive language colliding with an increasing awareness that prior justifications no longer suffice, while Christine, Robyn, and Janelle respond with controlled, precise contributions, framing their perspectives in ways that reinforce both consistency and credibility, highlighting emotional consequences without descending into overt recrimination. And the audience, both in the room and imagining themselves as observers, begins to perceive the layers of complexity, the interplay between intention and impact, authority and empathy, loyalty and accountability, as each testimony, document, and subtle interaction adds to the intricate web of narrative that is steadily unfolding. This is the moment where emotional investment peaks, because the story becomes immersive, compelling the audience to weigh each perspective and anticipate the consequences. And as the session progresses, evidence is introduced that had not been previously considered. Photographs, correspondence, and other artifacts that provide context, challenge assumptions, and underscore discrepancies between recollection and action. And the courtroom responds, the energy oscillating between tension, reflection, and the subtle exhilaration of revelation, with Kody attempting to address inconsistencies, sometimes fumbling, sometimes providing partial clarification, but always under the unrelenting scrutiny of both the judge and the women, whose combined testimonies have created a momentum difficult to counter. And Christine's statements are particularly poignant, blending factual recounting with emotional resonance, describing the erosion of trust, the subtle undermining of autonomy, and the invisible weight of constant compromise. While Robyn balances acknowledgement of personal choices with the defense of intent, navigating a landscape fraught with interpretive challenges, and Janelle interjects when necessary to clarify, reinforce, or highlight patterns, ensuring that the emerging narrative maintains coherence and continuity. And as each layer is exposed, the courtroom becomes a theater of psychological and emotional reality, where micro-expressions, tonal shifts, and silences communicate as much as the spoken words, creating a dense tapestry of relational dynamics, historical context, and the unfolding consequences of long-term decision-making. And the judge, presiding over this delicate orchestration, interjects at strategic moments to direct focus, ask clarifying questions, and ensure that the testimony, evidence, and participant perspectives are integrated into a coherent narrative that can be understood both legally and emotionally. And as the session advances, moments of confrontation become unavoidable, the energy peaking as Kody is asked to address both documented evidence and the emotionally charged narratives of the women. And the room reacts to every hesitation, every shift in tone, every subtle gesture with an almost imperceptible ripple that conveys judgment, anticipation, or disbelief. And the women capitalize on these moments, articulating patterns of favoritism, emotional oversight, and consequences with precision, ensuring that their narrative remains consistent, credible, and compelling, while simultaneously managing the emotional intensity to maintain engagement without tipping into chaos. And as the session reaches its midpoint, a particularly explosive revelation emerges, a hidden document or correspondence that reframes previous testimony, exposing contradictions, previously unacknowledged motivations, or evidence of deliberate prioritization. And the impact is immediate, a palpable tension gripping the room, Kody's composure faltering, Robyn's controlled breathing reflecting inner conflict, Christine's calm intensity sharpening, and Janelle's analytical demeanor remaining steadfast, providing a contrast to the emotional turbulence surrounding her. And the judge carefully guides the proceedings, balancing the need for factual clarity with the management of highly charged emotional testimony, emphasizing both accountability and accuracy, ensuring that the narrative thread remains coherent amidst the layered complexity, while the audience experiences a combination of suspense, empathy, and anticipation, drawn into the intricate interplay of personal history, emotional consequence, and legal scrutiny. This is the point where suspense and engagement converge, because the stakes are now both personal and consequential, compelling attention. And as the session continues, dialogue intensifies, the interplay between accusation, explanation, and emotional disclosure, creating a rhythm that maintains engagement while steadily escalating tension. And every new piece of evidence, testimony, or micro-expression contributes to the broader narrative, reinforcing continuity, consistency, and the unfolding emotional journey. And as the session approaches its conclusion, a subtle but significant twist is introduced, a perspective or revelation that challenges prior assumptions, reshapes alliances, or highlights previously unnoticed patterns. And the courtroom collectively reacts, the women adjusting their posture, expressions, and delivery in response, Kody visibly processing the implications, and the judge methodically integrating the new information into the overall assessment, leaving the room suspended in a heightened state of anticipation, with unresolved questions, emerging clarity, and a sense that the forthcoming sessions will demand even greater emotional engagement and narrative attention. And as the gavel falls to mark the end of this session, the lingering tension, unspoken questions, and newly revealed dynamics ensure that both participants and audience are left on edge, fully aware that the story is far from resolved, that revelations will continue to unfold, and that the complex interplay of personal history, emotional consequence, and accountability will drive the narrative forward into the next chapter. The courtroom feels suffused with an almost unbearable tension as the final session begins, the accumulated weight of the previous 7 sessions pressing down on every individual present. And as the judge takes his seat with a gravity that signals the importance of what is to come, there is an unspoken acknowledgement that this is more than legal procedure. It is the culmination of years of hidden conflicts, unspoken resentments, and carefully managed perceptions finally converging into a singular moment of reckoning. And Kody sits rigid, jaw tight, hands clasped in front of him, aware that every glance, every micro-expression, and every word will be dissected not only by the court, but by the women whose lives have been intertwined with his for decades. While Christine leans forward, her posture tense but controlled, eyes fixed with a quiet intensity that carries both the weight of personal pain and the precision of someone who has long observed, analyzed, and understood the dynamics at play, and Janelle, maintaining her signature calm, watches the room with meticulous attention, noting every subtle gesture, every shift in tone, and the faintest changes in body language that reveal underlying emotion, while Robyn's fingers twist together nervously in her lap, her breathing measured but uneven, reflecting the tension of navigating truth, perception, and self-preservation simultaneously. And the judge calls the session to order, his voice resonant, underscoring the seriousness of the proceedings, before directing focus to the first piece of testimony, a compilation of prior statements, documents, and emotional accounts that together create a dense, layered narrative of choices, consequences, and relational impact. And as each piece of evidence is introduced, the room collectively leans in, absorbing, reacting, and recalibrating understanding, because what is being revealed is not just factual, but deeply human, highlighting the interplay of intention, perception, and emotional consequence in ways that cannot be ignored. And Kody, when prompted to respond, struggles to maintain the carefully constructed defenses that have served him in the past, his voice carrying both defensiveness and a subtle vulnerability, betraying the inner conflict between his understanding of his own intentions and the undeniable impact of his actions on those around him, while Christine rises to provide additional clarity, her tone measured, precise, yet deeply infused with emotion as she recounts the cumulative effect of being repeatedly sidelined, overlooked, and emotionally minimized, her words punctuated by moments of quiet reflection that carry a weight disproportionate to their volume, and the room is absorbed in her articulation, recognizing that her narrative is not an accusation born of spite, but a reasoned, deeply felt account of lived experience. And Robyn follows, her testimony carefully balancing acknowledgement of personal choices, the defense of intent, and the navigation of complex emotional terrain, revealing both her perspective on events and her attempts to mediate and maintain family cohesion, while Janelle interjects as needed to clarify inconsistencies, reinforce patterns, and highlight the broader implications of behavior and decision-making over time, ensuring that the emerging narrative is both coherent and compelling. And as the session progresses, the interplay between spoken testimony, documented evidence, and subtle behavioral cues creates a dynamic tension that keeps both participants and audience fully engaged as the unfolding story blends legal scrutiny with emotional revelation, and each exchange contributes to a deeper understanding of the relational dynamics at the center of the case. This is the moment where retention peaks because every word, gesture, and pause is charged with consequence and anticipation. Strong. Paragraph breaks up here. Paragraph breaks up. Ready. Paragraph breaks up. Ready. And as the session advances, the judge introduces a previously unseen piece of evidence, correspondence that illuminates intent, decisions, and emotional impact, and its introduction instantly shifts the energy in the room. Kody visibly processing the implications, Christine's composure solidifying into a mix of resolve and restrained triumph, Robyn maintaining a careful balance between acknowledgement and defense, and Janelle integrating the new information with analytical precision, while the audience perceives the cumulative effect, the way each revelation reframes prior understanding and intensifies the narrative. And as questions are posed and answered, the tension escalates, the emotional stakes rising with each clarification, acknowledgement, and subtle expression of impact, and the courtroom becomes a stage upon which past choices are dissected, motives examined, and consequences illuminated in vivid detail, as patterns of favoritism, neglect, miscommunication, and emotional prioritization are laid bare, challenging assumptions, revealing hidden truths, and compelling all participants to confront both the immediate and long-term implications of their actions. And as the testimony continues, moments of vulnerability surface, Kody admitting to unintended consequences, Robyn revealing internal conflict and emotional compromise, Christine articulating the pain of invisibility and the erosion of trust, and Janelle providing the connective tissue that links testimony to pattern, context to consequence, and individual action to collective impact, creating a narrative that is both deeply personal and broadly resonant. And as the session reaches its climax, the final pieces of evidence, corroborating documents, emotional testimony, and subtle micro-behavioral observations converge to create an undeniable tableau of relational dynamics and consequences, leaving Kody visibly shaken, Robyn emotionally measured but tense, Christine resolute, and Janelle composed yet intensely engaged, and the judge, acknowledging the depth and complexity of the session, guides the discussion toward reflection, resolution, and acknowledgement, allowing each participant the opportunity to speak to the implications of the revelations, their emotional impact, and the path forward, while maintaining legal clarity and procedural integrity. And as the final statements are delivered, there is a palpable shift in the room, a recognition that the cumulative effect of years of choices, patterns, and interactions has now been articulated, examined, and contextualized, leaving an indelible mark on both the participants and the narrative itself. And as the session draws to a close, consider this: how much of what we perceive is shaped by intention versus impact, and who truly bears responsibility when the lines blur between love, authority, and personal consequence. And with a final gavel strike, the session concludes, not with resolution or absolution, but with the powerful, lingering awareness that the truth, once fully revealed, changes everything. That accountability has been established through both factual and emotional revelation, and that the journey through this courtroom saga has illuminated the complexity, fragility, and interwoven nature of human relationships, leaving both participants and audience profoundly aware that stories, like families, are rarely simple, never static, and always demand engagement, reflection, and the courage to confront reality in all its challenging and deeply human dimensions. Per P, bracket, subsection, breakdown, problem, end problem.